Here's another story about Jeremy James. This time, he's gone to the zoo. The story's by David Henry Wilson, and it's called Feeding an Elephant. It was one of those bright, blue sky birdsong days when Mummy suddenly remembered that fresh air was good for you and the family hadn't been out for days and weeks and months. "Let's go to the zoo," she said. Jeremy James smiled. "What, today?" said Daddy. Jeremy James frowned. "Yes, today," said Mummy. "We could do with some fresh air, and anyway, we haven't been out for days and weeks and months." "But it's Saturday," said Daddy. "I know," said Mummy. Well, the place will be crowded, and, I suppose there's a football match on the television," said Mummy. "Well, yeah, as it happens, there is, but..." And so Mummy, Daddy and Jeremy James went to the zoo. Jeremy James loved the zoo, and most of the time, Mummy and Daddy behaved quite well when they went to the zoo, probably because they loved it too. The problem was that they all liked different things. Daddy would settle in front of the lion's cage and start talking about noble beasts in captivity, and they'd have to drag him away or he'd stay there till sleeping time. Mummy was fascinated by the birds with their bright feathers and would start talking about colourful nature, patterns and grace, and then she had to be dragged away. But what annoyed Jeremy James most was that both Mummy and Daddy loved the monkeys. And whilst he and Mummy could drag Daddy away from the lions, and he and Daddy could drag Mummy away from the birds, he, all on his own, hadn't got a chance of dragging both Mummy and Daddy away from the monkeys. Today, Mummy and Daddy were extra keen on the monkeys. "Look at that!" shrieked Mummy, as an ugly creature with a sore bottom jumped onto a rubber tyre and grinned. "Oh, they're a scream," said Daddy. But they weren't a scream at all. The fact was that they didn't do anything that Jeremy James couldn't do just as well. But when monkeys did it, Mummy and Daddy laughed and thought it was wonderful. And when Jeremy James did it, he simply got told off. Only that very morning he had done a magnificent leap from the sofa onto Daddy's armchair, not to mention braving the raging river 1,000 feet below, and had merely been dryly told not to jump on the furniture. Not a laugh. Not a clap. Just, "Jeremy James, don't jump on the furniture." And when he swung from the apple tree, did they gaze at him with love and admiration in their eyes? No. Either they didn't watch him at all, or if they did, they simply shouted, "Mind the apples, Jeremy James, or if you tear your trousers, you'll see what you'll get." And as for bananas, that was the unfairest cheat of all. They gave bananas to the monkeys just to see how they peeled them. And when the monkeys peeled their bananas, Mummy and Daddy would grin at each other and say how clever the monkeys were. But if Jeremy James asked for a banana, which he could peel 100 times quicker than any old monkey, they'd say, "Wait till tea time," and that was that. Mummy and Daddy had got stuck in front of the monkeys. They'd be there all day, and that was a fact. And Jeremy James couldn't see the joke or the point. So Jeremy James waited till one of the monkeys was being particularly clever, beating his chest and showing his teeth, which apparently is a marvellous trick that had all the grown-ups roaring with laughter. And Jeremy James slipped away into the crowd and off in the direction of the elephant house. Elephants, after all, were the biggest animals, and they were easily the most interesting. Elephants could do things that Jeremy James couldn't do at all, like squirting water over themselves, picking up buns with their noses and squashing cars. Elephants were really talented, not like monkeys. There were lots of people at the elephant house, which wasn't a house at all, but a great big sort of playground with rails round it and with a ditch on the other side of the rails. The elephants could just about reach the rail with their trunks and sniff up the buns and things that people were giving them. Daddy never let Jeremy James feed any animals because he said there were notices everywhere saying, "Don't feed the animals" on them. And Daddy was the only one who ever saw these notices. It was obvious that even if there were notices, the animals couldn't have written them, so they were unfair. Everyone likes buns and sweets and biscuits and things, and the animals like them too, so Daddy was probably being mean. In his pocket, Jeremy James had 2 slices of bread. He'd smuggled them out of the house. They weren't ordinary bread. They were bread with currants in. The sort of bread elephants dream about. And he brought them just for the elephants. and although he'd quite have liked to have had a bite or two himself, especially of a curranty bit, he could see the expression on the elephant's face already, and he knew that the elephant knew that the currant bread was for him. So Jeremy James didn't take a single bite, not even to taste it. "Here," said Jeremy James, and reached out both slices at once. And then the elephant made a very silly mistake. He took both slices with a scrapey, creepy, snuffly whiff of Jeremy James's hand. But between hand and mouth, very foolishly, the elephant forgot there were two. One he tossed into his mouth, and the other he let fall right onto the edge of the ditch. "Hey," said Jeremy James, "don't forget the other one." But the elephant, who must have been a very stupid elephant, not only forgot it, but also ignored Jeremy James completely. He just turned his head away and looked around for someone else to feed him. And Jeremy James's second slice of currant bread lay all uneaten on the edge of the ditch. "There! Look!" shouted Jeremy James. "On the edge of the ditch! Look!" shouted Jeremy James. "Opposite your foot!" shouted Jeremy James. The elephant nearly trod on it, but he didn't see it. Jeremy James remembered one of Daddy's words. "It's opposite your blooming foot," he shouted. But the elephant didn't take any notice. Here he is, holding out his piece of bread to the elephant. There was only one thing Jeremy James could do. After all, a slice of currant bread is a slice of currant bread, and you just don't smuggle currant bread out of the house to leave it lying on the edge of a ditch. "Oh, you're a silly elephant," said Jeremy James as he slipped between the railings. "You're as silly as those monkeys." Jeremy James reached the edge of the ditch, and a great shout went up from the crowd behind as he picked up the slice of currant bread. Then everything seemed to go very quiet indeed. So quiet that Jeremy James turned round to see what was wrong, but all the people were still there. They were just quiet, that was all. "Here," said Jeremy James, holding out the currant bread. "Come on, you silly elephant." The elephant slowly turned its head, and at last spotted the currant bread, and scrapey, creepy, snuffly whiffed it out of Jeremy James's hand. "Oh, about time too," said Jeremy James. Then he turned round and squeezed back through the railings, straight into the grip of a man wearing a zookeeper uniform, a moustache, and a red face. "Where's your mother and father?" said the moustache. "Well, I expect they're still wasting their time watching the monkeys," said Jeremy James. But just at that moment, Mummy and Daddy arrived, and their faces looked rather red too, and when they saw Jeremy James, they both said at the same time, "Where have you been?" And then the moustache said something to them, and then Daddy said something to the moustache, and then the moustache said something to Daddy, which made Daddy's face go very red. And then Daddy said something to Mummy, and Mummy, rather roughly, Jeremy James thought, jerked Jeremy James's arm and led him away from the elephant house, leaving Daddy and the moustache talking together in loud voices. "You must never," said Mummy, never go through fences or try and touch the animals. Do you understand? They're very dangerous. You could have been killed." "Well, I was only giving him a piece of bread he dropped," said Jeremy James. "And if you hadn't been such a silly elephant, I wouldn't have had to get it for him." But there wasn't really much point in trying to explain it to Mummy, because she didn't have much clue about animals. Someone who prefers monkeys to elephants can't be expected to understand elephants, or little boys, if it comes to that.